Okay, so like I mentioned, I think we may all be aware of the polls. I'm not going to go too in depth around the background of polls, although I was part of the polls 2016 study, and then my role was predominantly to oversee the translation process, the assessment process, the equivalent of the test across the different languages, but in a sense that plus minus more than 50 countries partake in it. Polls has been happening now for more than a decade, and for South Africa, we're now celebrating a decade, more or less, of 2 decades of polls, which is quite exciting. So I know that there's a lot of research that's coming out to kind of look at, other than just the learning outcomes, some of the trends that we're seeing in our education system particularly. And of course the DBE report, which I'm assuming everyone would have seen, that kind of speaks directly to South Africa. So for those that would like to understand more about the study, so that sort of red cover there is the comparative study across the different countries. You get a whole lot of resources under the IEA website, from examples of passages, from how they develop their assessment framework. So there's a lot of technical stuff that one can access. And I think often, I know in South Africa, we often debate around the credibility and the equivalentness of the assessment, and that's available on that sort of the IEA report. And of course, the DBE one speaks directly to South Africa. And then the note that was shared by Nick Spool, I think that was making the rounds. And I mean, again, just to summarize in a snapshot, at least my takeaway and readings from this report is that obviously, 80% of the kids cannot read for meaning in any language in South Africa. 2, that we've basically eroded all of the learning gains that we have made in the last decade. So there was a paper that was written by Martin Gustafsson before the polls that basically showed the incremental improvement that the sector has been kind of gaining over the last 10 years. And what basically the recent polls show us is that we're back now from square one. I was chatting to a colleague in the States, and she mentioned something, I didn't think about it, but she was like, well, surely the one thing that South Africa can take away, and I suppose all countries that can take away from COVID and learning losses, is that, this concept that there's no schooling or teaching that is happening, it's obviously been debunked. Clearly, one thing that we do know pre-COVID, that there were work and there has been learning gains. There is learning and teaching in classrooms, and we perhaps need to look at it or approach this at a much more complete way, or not entirely. And then the third one is that rural provinces had the largest decline. Again, not surprising that African languages continue to lag behind English and Afrikaans. So I think that one is one of those, like, we know this, we're familiar with this. I mean, this also speaks to the Matthew effect, the richer get richer, the poor get poorer. And I mean, we use languages as sort of a proxy to a whole sorts of things. SESs, a proxy to sort of questioning in terms of who are these teachers, how are they teaching, what are some of the contextual challenges that they have. So a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is really not by surprise. And then of course the last one that basically says girls do better than boys. So after all, it's not a man's world entirely, but of course this says a lot about dropout rates and the gender distribution, and what does this mean so for future trajectory of boys. But I think broadly I would say, this is a common takeaway, or at least a common overview takeaway of the polls results. Okay, so and then in thinking of preparing around this group or this conversation today, I can't stop reflecting on, sure, like, this is not new to us, and we know COVID has obviously meant that our cracks are like right in front of our faces. It's almost like forced us to convince, or not to convince, to kind of confront a lot of the learning, the learning or bimodal education system that was always existing in this country, right? So in one end, it provides us with a good sort of, let's look into the mirror as a country and as a sector and really try to reflect, not just to reflect, but to put things in place. So for this group, I was really kind of thinking, okay, now, what are the potential, I suppose, what would be the potential or the opportunities for a group like this on this call? And I think one of the things that NASCEE does bring is that we're sitting with a variety of organizations working and focusing on different things, and at different levels. And it's almost like, it reminds me of a pizza. You know, if you like me and you like avo and feta and bacon pizza, you know, every slice that you get from the pizza or that you grab from the pizza almost has either more or less bacon than the other. And depending which slice you pull, often influences, I suppose, or provides almost a lens for that organization or that individual, how they view education. Although I think my opinion is that discourse within the sector has been that is almost a disadvantage. But I do think, and I strongly believe, that the different perspective, the different lens in our contexts actually are a strength. I'm not convinced of whether we are capitalizing on that we've got sort of a variety of organizations working at different levels and targeting different parts of the system. I think we've always, even within civil society, I often joke with a good friend of mine, we talk about Hunger Games in the education civil society space. And I think now more than ever is the time to kind of like coordinate and really try and map out who's doing what where, because one, it can almost exacerbate the support in government support. Two, that actually, even though we're working in isolation, I'll put it in that way, or in silos, you know, we are contributing. For instance, the decade of learning gains that we've eroded. I do think without the role of civil society, I wonder whether we would be, I mean, it's not that much, but I wonder to what extent, if we didn't exist, government would be able to kind of see some of the gains. Well, now it's eroded, but previously some of the gains that they did. And I came across this sort of framework, which I think best kind of describes, and I mean, there's many of this, right? There's a whole lot of bunch of these theoretical frameworks, but I think in my view, sort of the recent OECD of how one kind of approaches a systemic or a system reform, which I do think that the reading crisis in my mind and in my assessment is like, okay, something really needs to change. It almost like feels like we need a system reform. This sort of Cronus system, for me at least, provides a high enough level outlook on if we were to change the education system, what are the different areas and levels we would have to approach it. I mean, I've been raised on the screen. So if you think of the student as the learner, there's the micro, meso, and exco and microsystem level. And depending who does what where, we probably can jot ourselves here. And it will be quite interesting to see, you know, of the people that are on the call and probably other partners that we can bring along, who is intervening at what level. So, I mean, the polls results now have been out for about 3 weeks. A lot of media attention again. Almost every 4 years we go into this manic mode as a country, but in just obviously doing a desktop review on where is PIRLS, again, individual sort of like, we kind of sat and see who's saying what about PIRLS and where are they sitting in relation to this chrono system. And again, to admit that this may include or may exclude some organizations, but it really was what was available to us on the internet. And in a nutshell, you know, the attention around PIRLS, or raising the awareness around PIRLS, at least in our assessment, is mainly just in media at the moment, right? So not to say that this may not change. Giles mentioned earlier on that DBE is convening. sort of a group of civil societies, but it almost seems like to us where a lot of the communications and a lot of the awareness, and rightfully so, media is part of this ecosystem that we're working with, but it's predominantly in the media, at least from our engagements, in where we've got footprint, and this is schools, which are the almost the main stakeholder of all of this reading outcome stuff. Are like, yeah, we know about PIRLS, but we don't actually really understand how does this relate to us, or what does this mean. There's probably going to be a circular that will be issued out by district in a couple of weeks that we're going to have to respond, or whatever the case is. But it almost feels like all energy, all platform, all mics, all efforts in raising this awareness at the moment today, it almost sits mainly in the media. And I think there's an opportunity again, as civil societies, to say, how do we almost educate across the ecosystem in our various roles or various footprint about what it is, what it means, and possible solutions of how to address that. And I guess what I've just highlighted, instead of just like using PIRLS as just like this every 4-year media rant, how do we use it ongoingly to address, throughout the system, to address learning outcomes? And how do we involve all these different levels and different stakeholders of the education system? So, I mean, for us in particularly, we're intentional about trying to look at this, or bringing in different outlooks or approaches, and again realizing that we for instance, for Rwanda, for example, we predominantly work in the microsystem. We work closely with teachers and schools, and directly with learners. So who are our other potential partners, or who can we tap in, or at least bring along with, or work with, partner up with in the other ecosystem? So I think for me, strongly to we increasingly trying to advocate for the system-wide approach of interventions, the system-wide outlook, and really to say there's no silver bullet. I think often what some of these things can do, again, create hunger games, rather to say, there's many routes to get into Rome. And I think, again, to stress the fact that probably now is the time when we coordinate ourselves well, and almost leverage where we have partners, or where organizations have footprint, and sort of support and amplify that work within those regions. Of course, with a caveat to say, if we want to amplify, if we want to increase reach, if we want to scale, this needs to be accompanied by funding. I think we can all agree that we can't go to scale if we're not having the backing, if we're not also influencing and kind of having conversations with philanthropies and foundation, how they fund, who they fund, what are their priorities. But again, to stress that now is the time that we need to be looking at this at a much more system level. Okay, cool. So some alternatives to the 4 main takeaways. Again, it's just from our perspective, I think there may be some interesting research that will be coming on board. But at a snapshot, is that, in a sense, what PIRLS does, in particular the grade 4 assessment, is it assesses the LOLT, the language of learning and teaching of learners of their foundation phase LOLT language in grade 4, right? And in a sense, I mean, it happens sort of mid-year, so it wouldn't include the curriculum of grade 4, and all of this is stipulated in that technical report. And as someone, I mean, who was involved in this process, literally every single school that is on that list, we would call and verify versus the DBE database whether their LOLT in grade 1 to 3 is indeed either one of the 11 official languages. So I know there's the whole another discourse, particularly in the language and literacy space, around why the specific language. It's grade 4, and yet the LOLT language, or the LOLT in grade 4 in policy is that kids transition into English, etc., etc. But there's been a clear, almost an intentional decision to say grade 4 home languages, and that's all all official languages. And then, as you know, in grade 6 this year, the reason why we only then assess in English and Afrikaans is that if you're assessing in grade 5, you technically are assessing competencies in the previous year in grade 4. So, and I think, we may all be aware of this, is that almost 70% of the kids in the country learn how to read, and that's sort of your grade R to grade 3 phase. In fact, grade 3 and younger phase learn how to read in an African languages, and hence why the magnitude of performance, or the magnitude of underperformance of African languages is increasingly, for me at least, becoming an even more important thing to focus on. Like Giles mentioned, is that if you're in education, I mean, these have ripple effects. Many theories around reading and literacy and how important it is to grasp your basic fundamental reading skills in your home language, because if you do that well in the beginning, you're able to transition, or you're able to learn an additional language or third language much more easier. So there's a whole literature, and I think people here in the school might be familiar with it.
But sorry to interrupt. We're just running tight on time.
Sure.
Are you able to wrap it up?
Sure.
Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Giles. I've just got 3 other alternatives, Giles, and then here, obviously, we know about the low benchmarks. Again, a civil society, and if you think of where you are in the ecosystem, is what does this really mean? So for an organization like Funda Wande, it's quite straightforward. I mean, we quite targeted in improving specific reading skills, and our intervention and programs are designed around that. But I know in the core, we may have organizations that work probably with school leadership, some may be working at after school at various of levels, some only just with teacher training, or running COPs, etc., etc. But what does almost trying to map out this reading for this low benchmark, what does it mean for the different sectors and the different parts? And this is just an example of, in a context of like Funda Wande, when we translate the reading, not reading for meaning, it actually means nuts and bolts skills. Okay, but this may mean different things for different people in the different sectors. So in a sense, it's to say we need to probably, or for organizations, is to unpack what is that sort of underneath the iceberg for your organization. It may be the same, I don't know, it may be different, but my hunch tells me different, depending on which system you're operating at. These things may mean different levers of change. Again, in terms of another perspective, if you look at it per language, so we know that English does and has always sort of outperformed African languages. But the interesting thing here for us is then to map up, obviously, where the biggest sort of losses are. And again, that speaks directly to the provinces, the northern provinces. But in understanding, for instance, for us, it's like, which organizations, reading organizations, and which languages are they focusing on, and almost like trying to decrease the learnings or the year of learnings in sort of your Tsonga, your Swati, and Setswana and Isindebele languages. Again, another way of looking at it is like, if we had to, for instance, I'm not saying we should pick a language, all of these languages are equally important, but if we were to channel efforts, more funding perhaps, or more provincial focus, where possibly could this be happening? Again, this is my last slide, is then I do think that there are a number, and not to say it's limited to this, but there could potentially be a number of civil society opportunities. And of course, the one is to have clear levers for change. So what are the things that do lead to change? And remaining responsive to the sector need. So not sort of like this 4-year manic that we get into. It's like, this is a long-term thing. We need long-term funding and long-term type of interventions in order to see the types of shifts that we would like. Again, if we are working with, if we're saying we're going to be partnering up with government, what are some of those packages that can either, one, support government, or two, government can kind of take up as sort of either provincial-wide or national-wide intervention? And I think linked to that is responsible advocacy. We don't want to advocate for the sake of advocating, or advocating for things that are either not working or not ethical. So I think that almost is a constant trait for us. And again, getting closer and understanding what works and what doesn't work. And not to say for that, those interventions or programs that doesn't work, is to say, how do we support organizations that are in proof of concept phase? Because, you know, the more we have foot soldiers, the better it will enable us to reach our goals. And then the last one, I think ongoingly, something that we don't often talk about, in particular when we're talking about hard skill stuff, is like, sure, but how we're building sort of a future generation of education leaders within the sector. And the last one is strategic partnership. Again, my viewpoint is that if we want to change the narrative of South African performance in PIRLS, we probably need to take a holistic approach. There's no one silver bullet. And again, just to stress on the need to be able to coordinate ourselves and almost have a better mapping of who's doing what, where, and where the support is needed, etc. Thanks. I'll end it. I'll close there.
Thanks, Nongamso. Much appreciated. I'm going to jump straight in. I mean, I think you gave us a lot of content. Got this going again. Like, we only had an hour, so this is a starting point. Dylan, do you want to just jump in with what you guys are doing at Click Learning with a more tech-enabled solution?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Giles, and good afternoon, colleagues. I am going to try and stick to my allocated time, since Ngamso so nicely laid out the why of Click and why we exist. So thank you very much for buying me some time there. I'm just quickly going to take you through what Click does to affect change in PIRLS results, or aims to do, what Click considers key to systemic change, and where NASCEE and its members can help with some of the barriers that we are experiencing. So let me just quickly share my screen.
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. So just maybe as a recap on what Nongamso was saying, as you saw in her data points, we have 80% of grade 4 learners who can't read for meaning. And in grade 4, 90% of learners study in English as their main language. And given that English is the building ground for future learning, we've aimed to kind of tackle English as the main subject. So Click is an NGO that was founded in 2012, and since 2012, we've worked very closely with provincial governments and districts. We've concentrated on servicing underserviced primary schools across South Africa in 5 provinces, and we've really focused on foundation phase or foundational literacy and numeracy, and in doing so, aiming to develop the digital skills through the tech that we offer. In the process, as a kind of secondary benefit, we've also created jobs for unemployed youth to assist in these schools in the actual implementation of the labs. And we firmly believe that through effective implementation of technology, we can significantly impact learner outcomes in an efficient, cost-effective, and scalable manner. A little bit of a snapshot. Currently, Click has 294 schools in which they're active. These are spread across Gauteng, the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KZN. We have to date 215,000 active literacy learners, which should grow to about 280,000, 36,000 numeracy learners, and we have currently created 731 jobs. And we utilize just over 18,000 devices in field to deliver the program software. Our massive overarching goal is to reach 1 million learners by 2025, and most importantly, to teach them to read for meaning and calculate with confidence by 2030. And in doing so, build those solid foundations for a better future. So what is it exactly that Click does? Well, it can be summarized into 4 key areas. So we obviously deploy online English literacy and numeracy programs, but it's not always as simple as it might sound. So we provide learner logins for self-paced e-learning software. This is numeracy and literacy, and we do all the rostering in the back end through CMIS and DDD. We then assist schools in enabling their infrastructure to enable an EdTech intervention. This is through procurement and management of devices, as well as security systems, insurance, and 5G connectivity, because we use online-based programs. We then fund and train and develop facilitators in these schools, and in doing so, as I mentioned before, help make a little dent in the youth employment issue. And then very importantly, we provide implementation support and guidance and monitoring over multi-years. So we have a dedicated contact center where issues can be logged and channeled, and we have immediate access to any data and insights that informs where schools are using or not using it, as well as our assessment data, which I'll speak to a little bit later. So
sorry, man, we're going to just have to, if you can jump straight into the kind of what you're seeing as the big issues and how NASCEE can help. I think we're just up against time here. Sorry, man.
Sure.
You can blame Nangamso, but we can do that afterwards.
She saved some time as well. No stress. So just in terms of some of the key factors in systemic change. So, you know, from our perspective, we really believe that there needs to be a really attentioned and detailed focused review and refinements of the CAPS curriculum. I know that it was mentioned that the DBE Lekgotla, it would be great to see what progress has been made on that and really driving, looking at what needs to be done in terms of changing that to kind of break this pattern that we are in. Then there's the breaking of the annual teacher plan or ATP logic. You know, it's really hard to follow an ATP that says, on this day, the learner must have grade 4 content in this week under this subject. If learners are so far behind and we have so many gaps to cover, how can we be moving along with content that they might not understand? And then I think quite importantly, an annual national standardized test across all grades. I know that in the Western Cape, they have the systemics, but I think, you know, this would be a really key indicator for us on success, and not this, you know, every 5-year study that comes out and then everyone wakes up. This is a key indicator that is publicized every single year. And then, you know, recognizing the use of technology as a scalable and effective solution, whether that being in the testing of actual of learners and their literacy knowledge, or it be through programmatic interventions. And then I think importantly, government prioritization of ITC in primary schools. There's a lot of plans that have been out there, but through actual action. And this ICT is there to enable teachers and learners, and obviously to give them the technology needed for change. And then conditional grants channeled at effective interventions. So very purposeful. If you deliver this outcome, this grant is available to you. And, you know, if there's no outcome, you don't receive the grant. And then one universal literacy assessment that can be quickly used and cost effective to determine impact at short intervals across the board. And then I think a fundamental change in the way we report on our matric pass rates, because that in itself should highlight some of the flaws in the foundational years. Where NASCEE can help, so I think through providing a coordinated voice on the need for a budgeted plan to catch up on learning losses, using data from all the organizations that are members, and then mobilizing members around a shared learning agenda that builds evidence bases on issues of effective interventions, technology, and assessments, developing position papers for wider engagement on CAPS reform, advocating for teaching at the right level, and then collaborating across the sector with people from Zero Dropout campaign to Innovative Edge to build a full whole schooling picture of everyone that's you know, assessing this data and intervening in all the different areas. And then lastly, encouraging assessed collaborations with very clear M&E frameworks associated with them. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Dylan, that was great. Thanks. And yeah, I really appreciate the time and effort you guys put into that last slide as well. I think that gives us a lot of food for thought around how NASCEE can position and coordinate efforts. In Kabakazi, I'm just going to share your presentation. So Nkabakazi is coming from Nalibali. She's the CEO. And Nkabakazi, you're welcome to go. Just let me know how you want me to share your slides.
All right, yeah, we can start with that one. Good afternoon, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. We are not going to take long. I think I'll just zoom into it. But for those who are not familiar with Nalibali as to what do we do, in a nutshell, we help children to fall in love with reading. And we know that falling in love is a natural process. Then we create an enabling environment so that children can engage with content that will build their appetite to read more and more. So we create stories that help to mold their language and literacy skills. So when we're looking at the PIRLS results, and also we should be mindful that these were for 2021, we're just coming out of COVID, and yes, we do expect that there are learning losses from there, and there has been a lot of efforts that have been invested from different angles trying to move the needle and try to drive significant change in the reading culture in our children. So the insights that we pulled from PIRLS, actually, they are so related to the study, the research study that Nalibali is commissioning, which is the National Reading Survey that is looking into the reading practices of the adult population, because we know that for children to be introduced to reading and for their reading culture to be nurtured, it takes an adult who's in the living and the learning space of that child. So when we're looking at what was being assessed by PIRLS, yes, they looked at the reading comprehension, they look at e-reading ability, they look at the attitudes and access to reading content by children who are under the age of 10, or actually in grade 4. And when we were comparing those levers, they are so, it's exact replica of what we are also looking into our study, because we believe those are the levers, key levers for reading culture. What will it take to make a significant change or shift in the reading culture is the levels of motivation, the levels of reading ability, and the levels of access to reading materials. So what we noticed with the PIRLS findings is that the children's attitude towards reading, actually, 47%, they do actually like reading. We had 11% of children who were really not interested, and we've got more girls who admitted that they do love reading more than boys. It relates to what Nangamso mentioned. And also access. The PIRLS results were looking at access, how much time do they have in the school environment to read. And it shows that there's 27% of children who read more than 30 minutes in the school, 39% who have no time to read at all, and 34% who read less than 30 minutes. That shows that there are gaps in terms of reading access, reading opportunities, and access to reading content. Comprehension, we already know that there's 19% of children who can read with comprehension, but our main interest was on the socioeconomic backgrounds, to say where the children who were being assessed, where do they come from? And the results show that 5% come from the higher socioeconomic status, and 61% comes from the lower socioeconomic status, which means that's where our focus should be. That's where we should tailor our efforts. Can you move to the next one? So what are we doing as Nalibali, and how is our work trying to shift the needle? First of all, a lot of people do not believe that storytelling does have impact in driving or developing language and literacy skills in children. Actually, for all ages, not just in early years. And it is not practice. It should be practiced both in school and out of school, because every word that a child hears, it counts. And it builds multiple skills and a lot of cognitive processes in a child that we cannot even mention. There's quite a lot. And also read aloud. Read aloud, we have a campaign as Nalibali we call the World Read Aloud Day. It's on the 1st of February. It's an annual event, and we managed to reach millions of children. For this year, we reached 2 million children through the pledges from the NGOs, schools, ECD centers, families, and community volunteers who pledged to read to a child on that one day. I will mention just later as to how are we moving with that so that it's a daily activity, not just a once-off practice. And also we felt that book ownership, it does sustain the reading culture. So we want to see more children having access to storybooks. It could be digital or it could be printed, but we feel that you can sustain reading culture when children engage more with printed books. And it's not just Nalibali who offers or provides multilingual storybooks. It is Sadie, it is Book Dash, it is Wetworks, it is Quali Books, or they call themselves Key Books. But as Nalibali, we provide a story newspaper where we produce 300,000 copies each month, which is distributed to all these different settings, and we have an anthology. And also, we've seen that another key lever is the ability and the confidence to read, mostly in adults more than children. Because if we encourage adults to share a book or read stories with children, then they need self-efficacy to say, I'm confident enough to read because it's in home language. I'm confident enough to run these reading sessions with my child at home. And from there, then children can eventually start to read independently and enjoy reading. I normally ask a question as to whose hand touches the book first. Because as the adults are introducing reading to children, they touch the books more often, but eventually we want children to touch the book first. Because that shows that they're falling in love with reading, that shows that they're demanding reading content, and it shows that they are leading their reading journey. Please move to the next one. So what do we think should be done, and what can really move the needle significantly where we can see tangible results? As I mentioned that with the World Read Aloud Day, we managed to reach 2 million children in one day. And from there, we clustered all of those pleasures into communities, digital reading communities. And they're clustered in language, they're clustered in province, and they're also clustered according to the institutions. And from there, each and every week, we provide them with digital reading resources. We track their reading patterns and challenges. We support their reading journeys so that regular exposure. We believe that children, if they regularly exposed to literacy content, stories mainly, their reading ability and their comprehension will improve. And we reach these parents through our WhatsApp bot, so they do not incur any costs. When it comes to downloading the reading content, it's both in text and also in videos. So we believe that if we can spread the news in all our platforms and get people to join in these WhatsApp groups, we will have more adults reading with children every day. Please move to the next. We are launching a national reading barometer. It's a national representative survey where we participated by 4,200 adult population across the country, where we're studying their reading habits, attitudes, motivation, and levels of access with both digital and printed reading materials. And from there, it will help us to see where do we tailor our resources, how do we adjust our approaches and interventions in literacy, not just as Nalibali. This is a partnership with the National Library of South Africa, and it is supported by the leading funding organizations, including DBE, NECT is there, DG Marais Trust is there, Zenex Foundation is there, and multiple actors in the literacy space are also collaborating in that study. We believe that it's going to inform and influence and bring a lot of change in how we understand reading and how we understand the reading cultures in the country. And we need to meet people where they are. We need to understand the adult population as they are the key drivers of e-reading culture in the different settings. Then we've seen that if we want to drive behavioral change in all the settings, homes, ECTs, and schools, we need to have some modification tools, behavioral modification tools. And we all know that book ownership is one of those. And if we want to ensure that children sustain reading practices every day, then they need to own a book. It's either it could be a book, that one book that they can read for the whole year that has multiple stories, or it could be digital access. As I've already mentioned, I believe that Keybooks is also here because they do have a platform for digital reading resources. But what we've seen and what has been surprising even in our interventions is the reader identity. We've got items like the one that you see, which is a wristband. It has a statement. It has different statements that children they identify as readers, and the statement can say, I love reading, I enjoy reading, I am a reader. And from those statements, children follow those behavior, those identities, because they believe if you are a reader, you should be reading. And then they start to demand for reading. So we've been spreading these across in all our interventions, in all our promotional events, so that the more they're out there, then children are going to adopt the reader identity. We believe also we can use such platforms to distribute such items. Okay, back to you, Charles.
Thanks, Nkabakazi. And thanks to you, Dylan, and Nangamso. I think you've given us, we're just dipping our toe in here and we're trying to figure out next steps. So, this is an iterative process that we're figuring out together. I know a lot of you guys know this stuff, but I think it's important that we had to start somewhere. So thank you to the presenters for putting it out there. And I want to just check if Duncan Hindle or John Thurlow are available to just give us the insight. Duncan's here, insight into what the NECT, thanks, great, Duncan, you here, what the NECT's got planned in partnership with the DBE and how we can work together on that. I think what I do want to say before Duncan presents is that one of the things that we want to do at NASCEE is create a working group that can take this work forward on behalf of NASCEE. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think it'll also help Duncan position what the NECT are thinking with the DBE. Duncan, over to you, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Giles, and good afternoon to all the fellow NASCEE members. Let me just say how much I appreciate the presentations that have been made. I think they've been particularly valuable, and I hope, as you say, we can fit into the next steps kind of thinking now, Giles, in that. Colleagues, as Giles has indicated, the NECT Education Collaboration Trust has been working with the department at the
Oh dear, we've lost Duncan.
request of the minister.
Duncan, sorry, we lost you there as you said that you've been working in partnership with
PIRLS results. What can we learn from that? We've been working with the department at the request of the minister to arrange a public policy dialogue on the matter of reading, what we can learn from the PIRLS results, how we can respond to those. And it looks like, colleagues, that the event will take place on the 6th of June. That's a week away. And really, it's just, I think, my role today to say I do hope that particularly a working group from NASCEE will be active participants in that dialogue. We're planning a number of breakaway sessions focused on different aspects, which we'll share with you. And I do hope that we get the voice of civil society into that dialogue You would know, I'm sure, that the National Reading Plan is under review, and I think everyone sees this now as a step towards informing how that review should take place, etc. So, colleagues, really, it's just a heads up. Yeah, we'll certainly get the invitation to Giles. Certainly all interested participants, but particularly, as I say, those working in this area to participate in those breakaways. Let's get the voice of civil society into here. I think that's my message, unless John has anything to add. Thank you, Giles. Any questions if there are two?
Thanks, Duncan. John, just come in if you do have anything else. But I think it's important that we just get that invitation out to all the members. I think some people received it already this morning, Duncan. But it'd be good to maybe just send it to me, and then I'll make sure it goes out to all the members. And I think people must opt in from within the organizations. And then as the working group gets together, because I don't think we'll necessarily be able to get together before then, but I think we've got to organize ourselves in as constructive way as possible to support these efforts, because I think it's a long haul. It's not a sprint. I think it's going to take some real thinking and coordination and collaboration to make this work. But thank you. Okay, guys, we don't have a lot of time left. So I think the big positioning piece that I want to make, I see there are some good questions coming in, is that I think Dylan, you gave some ideas, and Gamso, you had ideas. All the presenters, Kabakazi as well, what NASCEE can do. But maybe just to open it up, if there are any comments around like setting up a working group, we're figuring it out as we go. Any comments around what you think NASCEE needs to do, or just comments on this session before we close it off? I'm happy just for people to jump in or put it in the chat. So it always is tricky coming in like 86 people on a call. But feel free if you feel feeling brave. I'm just having a look at the questions. I don't know if anyone. I haven't had a chance to look at the questions. As any of the other NASCEE board members, I think this it looks like some really good value here.
Giles, did you want a verbal question?
Please, go for it, Grace.
Has anybody put the relation between our very young parents in terms of the youth parenting debacle that we have at the moment, with a number of pregnancies happening with children under the age of 20, connected that to what we have currently, which is a very, very big problem in education in the junior primary sector, because we have a rolling ball coming.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Grace. Nontobeko?
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, thank you for the beautiful presentations, and indeed, it is a big challenge. But I think we've been doing some of the things that we are still doing, and maybe we need to rethink what have we not done that we must start doing, and those things that we must continue doing. I liked the presentation, Ngabakazi, hi Ngabakazi, on the socioeconomic status, because it is not only in reading where the socioeconomic status affects schooling. We work in the Northern Cape in one of the most disadvantaged communities, and schools are saying, help us, we have these socioeconomic problems. So the education in certain communities, the education problems are secondary. The primary are the socioeconomic challenges, and these we cannot underestimate. Just last week we had a meeting with an association of social workers that they're saying they're doing work in the education space, and I'm not saying we must start from scratch, but look at what we can do as we continue, because and also COVID created its own mayhem, and and even another on the languages. Where we work, the home language is Setswana. I don't speak Setswana, but and working with foundation phase teachers, almost 70% of foundation phase teachers say, we don't understand Setswana. Have you ever paid attention to teachers, their own language challenges? Or we assume that because they speak Setswana, they can teach Setswana. We have not conducted any research, but we listen to, of course, we work with only 15 schools, a small organization.
That's so true. Yeah, but it's still real for you, and I think it's very valid. And I think, these
and we are available.
The complexity is enormous.
Yes, thank you.
And it's not an easy fix this. So, I think we've all got to be very clear on that. But I think these solutions and the thinking is what we're wanting to harness and bring together. I'm going to just take we've got like a minute to go. So I'm going to just take a question from Erica and then followed by Jenny. So Erica, if you can make it crisp, knowing guys that there's going to be more. This is a start. Erica,
yeah, thanks everybody. We do see youth as an opportunity, the unemployed youth. We do see the leverage of having unemployed youth in schools matched with a tool, with a screening tool for learning gaps, and then providing some gap interventions as a solution that is really quickly implementable and will tackle both the socioeconomic unemployment, whatever problem, and supporting the teachers as well as the diagnostics. So I think maybe solutions are not too far away. We just haven't thought about how to couple them at the moment. That's just a comment.
Yeah, an easy one is just looking down the list of attendees and having a look at like who you know, and who you met recently, who have you chatted to about the work that you do. I think it's a quick diagnostic of how much more we can collaborate. Jenny, please.
Thank you. I'm Jenny Glennie from SAD, but African Storybook is our particular initiative here. I just want to say I'm really excited by this idea of having a working group, because I think there's an unbelievable amount we can do together. There have been many, just looking at classroom libraries, for example, as in one way of encouraging the love of reading. If we were able to supply across the country, I've done the maths, it's not an enormous amount of money. What may be more money is working with teachers to use them properly. And then if we have this group of people to think about, working with teachers to use them properly, it's a really fantastic opportunity. So, but I'd also like to say, Dylan, I really go along. Teaching at the right level, I think, is really important matter. I once taught a group in a very poor school in England. They were in grade 9. I was meant to teach them algebra, and they couldn't actually add two numbers that got to more than 10. And, why else didn't they throw compasses around the classroom? Because what else could they do in that environment? Anyway, I changed the curriculum. I was in a position to do that. But in our schools at the moment, we're not really in a position to do that. And, when people don't know the letters at the end of the first year of schooling, really hard to get into reading for meaning in 3 years' time.
Yeah, 100%. Jenny, thanks. So I think on that note, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming on this call. We had a big group of people, and I think it's the next steps is what's important. This was, as I said in the beginning, this is a starting point. We're figuring out how to do this and how to create space for this kind of dialogue, coordination, and collaboration. So I will be sending something out around putting up your hand to get involved in a working group. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know how much time it's going to involve. I don't know how many people we need. So it will be very open, and let's see who comes. Everyone is welcome. And then I think that working group's got to figure out how to take this forward. But I think we do need a group leading on behalf of all of us and doing the thinking. We can't try and include everyone in everything. So I think it'll be helpful to narrow it down and just get a group getting their arms around this problem, and then it also gives us a platform to then engage with government and with the NECT, who also, you know, sitting in a similar position. So, guys, please look out for that email. It'll probably be tomorrow that it'll come through, and give ourselves a chance to think about it. But I'm hoping that, you know, from the level of participation here, we'll get a good group of people together who want to take this forward. But it is a crisis, and it is something that we've all got to kind of put our heads together to figure out how we go forward and work with government to make it happen. Thanks to the presenters. Nongamso, thanks for stepping up and putting that first piece together was really important. And Dylan and Kabakazi are much appreciated, and the guys from the NECT.